it depends on the starting point that you want on a creative level, I guess. So I think emotion will always be trumped by real humans than AI, but I think AI is going to get incredibly close at replicating it, but it relies on the initial source. Hello.
Oh, hi. Hello. You always do your weird hello.
Hello. It's like my podcast hello.
Is it? Nice. I like it.
It's because I feel a bit awkward. I just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Sounds like you're trying to be posh, like you're trying to replicate some book of 5 ways to sound like you speak proper English.
Are you saying I don't?
No, I'm categorically saying that you don't.
Rude.
Hello, welcome to the Hear Me Out podcast. We're a creative music agency helping brands use sound strategically. We've helped brands with a combined revenue of over £1 billion to use sound to unlock value that only sound can.
And in this 7th episode of our first series, we are going to be asking each other about a commonly held belief, mainly regarding sonic branding, but actually today we're going to flip it to sound, to music in general. And we're asking each other, is it true or false? Are they misconceptions? And in today's episode, we're going to be exploring whether AI-generated music can replace human-made music. We'll put a little sonic branding tilt on it, but I've had this conversation come up quite a lot in my LinkedIn messages recently, where people are trying to sell me like AI tools to create music. And as 2 music producers making a podcast, I think we probably have a lot to say about it.
Yes. But
rolling up my sleeves for those listeners.
Yeah, I suppose it really comes down to how it helps brands as well, is something that we should be bearing in mind in this. Because obviously we're coming at it from what could be construed as a romantic perspective. And as we say to a lot of people, sound is a tool that can unlock value that only sound can.
Yeah.
So we try to not romanticize the use of sound, the effectiveness of sound for brands. So I also don't think we can romanticize AI's impact on that.
I think we should talk very practically and very...
I am an AI generated version of me now. I'm not actually here. So it's been pretty helpful for freeing up some time.
Yeah. I wonder why you look dead behind the eyes.
Yeah. Well, it's just 2 years with you, isn't it?
Really mean. I felt really mean saying that. I retract it all.
It's 2 years
with
you. It's the business.
Exactly.
You're grinding me down. So let's, maybe we should start doing maybe we should start doing a yes or no at the beginning and seeing if it changes at the end. So do you think that is a misconception? Do you think AI will replace human-made music?
I think it's a misconception. I don't think AI will ever...
So you say it is a misconception. Over. You're saying yes at the beginning. I'm also saying yes at the beginning. So do people really care that much about the quality of the music that is associated with their brand? We obviously care a lot about it, but the biggest issue with AI for me is that it all sounds a bit lame and it all just sounds a bit lifeless and uninspired. And I would never want to put emotionally, that.
Or are you talking quality in terms of
both.
Studio quality?
I suppose I don't really care about the studio. It's both, but they both influence each other. You know, like a dull, lifeless recording of boring sounding sounds generally doesn't make me feel anything. So it's like, it's sort of intrinsic. And then a really well recorded, interesting guitar sound playing a really boring melody isn't going to make me feel anything either. So one can't sort of replace or outdo the other one, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's just brought a song I love to my mind by Jacob Collier. And it's basically a voice note he did, singing, playing acoustic guitar. And it's just bloody brilliant. And I imagine they probably tried to do a studio quality version of that song, and it just never could replicate the moment he had wherever he was, whatever his mindset was when he recorded that initial voice note. And it's stunning. Compared to studio quality. So I don't think studio quality, or like in a real basic sense, is a problem anymore, because I think people will always be attuned to emotion, and that's the most important thing.
Like the Beatles recorded their first few albums in mono. Because like, it's in mono, I don't want to listen to that, you know? It's like, because the songwriting, the emotion it makes you feel is on.
Exactly.
On
so I don't think that's an issue. I actually think AI is incredibly impressive on the high quality.
Maybe that is the issue. It's so high quality that it lacks that humanity as well in some of it, because, you know, you like a lot of people recording stuff don't have that kind of precision.
That's a very good point. Yeah. And like voiceovers and voice in AI is becoming incredible as well.
Yep.
But I think it relies on the human initially in order to capture the right tone and voice and emotion for it to then be able to replicate it. So I think it's a very interesting, it depends on the starting point that you want on a creative level, I guess. So I think emotion will always be trumped by real humans than AI, but I think AI is going to get incredibly close at replicating it, but it relies on the initial source. And I can see a world where it will create its own version of emotion and its own version of a human, or it already is, I guess, but at the moment they're always stemming off an original vocal that was once a human, which is why the really good circumstances work.
And that's the issue in terms of why I think it's not going to be usable for so many brands. Because the thing that a lot of people don't even realize is that a lot of these AI music generation platforms, they aren't actually legal. And the ones that sound crap are the ones that have used music that they own to train their model. The ones that sound really good are the ones that have illegally referenced every piece of music that is in existence on the internet and then created stuff from it, which is illegal. And just because they give you a license doesn't mean it's an actual license. And people, 100% in the next 5 years, there'll be brands getting sued by a lot of the big rights holders.
There's a lot in court at the minute. Well, in House of Parliament, in terms of how we're going to approach all this from a creative angle. We don't have an outcome at the moment, but essentially, it's referencing. So if we think of it as a tool and no legal around it, I think it's interesting to think about where it could be used and where it's good and where it could be considered. And I see a space for it, as opposed to like you're trying to find some library music, some stock music right now, and you want something fresh and unique. I think where we're at is the same as images. I've seen some incredible AI art. Some that I to be honest, wouldn't be able to tell you if it was an original photo or if it was AI. That's like a 0.0001% of stuff I'm seeing going out. The rest of it, if I try and do it myself or on my phone or like using ChatGPT or something like that, it spits out something that's like kind of what I asked it to do, but it's rough and fluffy around the edges. And to bring it to a real brief that we had, we lost a brief recently to an AI piece of music. Yeah. The director we know behind the scenes was pulling their hair out because it just was never quite right. But they were so far down the line that they used it.
The director used it for the pitch to get the job. That's the interesting thing about that in terms of what it could replace.
Buzzword.
The cost of getting a custom piece of audio made to potentially get a pitch is very prohibitive for a lot of people. So you either use library music, which isn't going to hit all the marks that you might want, or very intelligently and smartly, they put some information into AI and got a track that really got the client involved and bought into it. And then like with artists, they get demoitis, like tonsillitis is a savage disease that unfortunately takes a lot of our artists down over the years. And it's when you just listen to something so much in a demo form that you can't hear anything else and think that it's better or does more. And so you just have to go with that.
I'd say 90% of the briefs that we haven't won, like over the final line, has been because the director or creative team just can't get past the initial reference for exactly the same reason that you've just said. Yeah. And I'd be interested, I would love to actually bring that director onto this podcast and really understand the ins and outs, like no screens, no masks. Like what was the challenges? Like why did you stick with it? Why did you keep coming back to us to try and adapt and change it because it wasn't quite working? Like how did you get over the headaches? Were you just too deep into it financially and project wise to ever go back? And they did have a celebrity singer on top, which I think is the main reason why it had any kind of success related to it. I wouldn't say it was a successful campaign for the music.
I think the interesting thing as well, to bring it back to the misconception, sadly for them, is is AI, can it replace humans? Even one, like a more foundational question that brings up or illuminates is that you still need to give AI something to do sonic branding. So it's like, if you are a brand and you want sonic branding, you then still have to be able to, verbalize and brief and understand what kind of music suits your brand and, what's the right word? Supports and enhances your marketing strategy, etc. So it's like AI can only create what it's told based on other examples that it's been given. So it might be able to recreate to a high enough degree or replace humans making music, but it still needs to have a human to tell it what to make. And that human still has to understand the brand, etc. So even if we get to a world, and the interesting thing with AI that I think gets me most excited is I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about people needing to upskill. There'll be like 90 million jobs lost to AI in the next 10 years, but there'll be 140 million new jobs created. And it's the curatorial aspect that will need. And it will need people to curate, and that will involve creating the brief and inputting it and then seeing what it gets back and then analyzing it and then curating, refining, and enhancing that product. So there's no part of it that ever can remove humans completely.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, so what are you really getting as a benefit of then taking humans out of the actual creation of the music besides a nominal reduction in cost that is potentially a huge compromise in emotional connection with your audience. And then when you think about it, for all these people that might be using that as an example or as an excuse or an argument, should I say, if you are doing any sort of considerably large marketing, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, pounds, whatever, if not a lot more. Even just on the ad spend, not even on the creation of the visuals, on the filming, animation, whatever you want to say. So then you're saving yourself 50 grand on music that you might want to be spending £1 million on an ad campaign. Like, how does that make sense when music has such a big impact on the end result? Like, is that where you want to compromise? Surely it's, some other aspect.
I think there's an interesting point to be made in that. How I was hearing what you were saying is almost like if you've got a really good product, selling it out to the world is easy or easier. Let's say if you have a really crap product, putting it out into the world and getting people to understand it and receive it is much more difficult. I saw a lovely post this morning. I don't know if you've heard of Unplugged. It's like a staycation, Airbnb type approach, completely off grid.
I looked at them after you commented on one of their posts.
I did, and all their marketing is stunning. And she was basically saying like it's the easiest brand to market because the places are stunning, they're in stunning locations, and we're trying to sell something that everybody wants to just be completely off grid and disconnected for a moment in time because life's too stressful or whatever, right? Such a on paper simple thing to promote, and to market it really, really well is difficult, but she was admitting that she's basically got a great product to market. So now I'm thinking about that in the context of AI, right? If you have a really bad song or sound, you're always going to find it really hard to see the effects of what great music can do for your brand or for your marketing. And it kind of brings me to a question of a scenario in my head that I think we should just play out of, I'm going to put a brief down on the table for us. Some brand wants music. They want sonic branding and they want a sonic logo. They want to use AI in some way, shape or form. They don't know how, don't know why. They just want to tick that box because it's a buzzword at the moment. How are you advising them on how to use AI in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, I think I would be interested in using it as a analytical tool for references and for information on what sounds. So like, oh, hey, cool. So these are the songs that we've picked as our reference playlist. We got these 5 songs we love and we think they're great. We want something that's going to hit a similar mark. Great. AI, analyze these songs. What's the most important elements? What's the most important sounds? Okay. Analyze the, listener base, if you have access to this, for gender, age, etc., whatever else you can get for the main listeners of these songs. Tell me, in your opinion, what do you think it is elementally that make up the parts of this song, which of those do you think is most engaging with the demographic that you have found listen to this song most? If you had to tell me how much of a percentage each element contributed to that engagement, what would that be? And then come back and be like, oh, these sorts of drums or this sort of synth sound across all of these songs is what seems to really be resonating with 26-year-old males in Uzbekistan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think analysis is a really interesting way to approach it and use it. And then
where would you use it?
I'd be using it in. Actually, no. Before we go on to my bit, I just want to hear the next phase of that for you. Would then from there on it would just be human made composition, production.
I suppose if you really wanted to make sure you got the exact same sound, something that would make producers' lives easier, is I would then be saying like, okay, this bass sound that you said is really like, what is that bass sound? How could a producer make that exact bass sound on inside their workstation, digital audio workstation, inside a synth? So you were like not thinking it's close. You can be like, go back to the client and say, this is exactly the same bass sound.
Yeah, I found the same plugin, I had the same setting, etc. Yeah. Okay, so that's an interesting approach that I think is actually quite accessible for people if they wanted to dive into it to find a way to use it as well, which is quite interesting. Good takeaway there. I'd be quite resistant initially on like the initial creative phase. I think I'm skipping forward to, we kind of know what we're creating. We've got a good sense of what's going to speak to those people. Musical knowledge that we've got, I think, will get us to. So assume we've done all that work, that exploration work up front. I probably would lean into what you're saying with some AI prompts and some helps, like see if you can push our mindset a little bit further and get some ideas. I think I'd probably always initially start with just some kind of human creativity, because I think that's how you'll get something completely unique. You know, AI is always going to replicate something else. Mm-hmm. Our job is to create unique identity, something that might not have been heard before. They're our dream jobs anyway. So I'd always want to start with a human approach. I'd be interested to then run it through AI and see what it spat out in terms of like, you know, what instruments have I not considered? Can you add some in? And just see what it came up with, and then maybe recreate those myself or with humans off the back end, and just see, you know, like that's what I love about you and I. You know, I'll start an idea, send it over to you. You'll throw back another version of that in a way that I never would have thought about, tweaking the drum production or adding in a certain keyboard sound, or like you play guitar, I don't play guitar. So that I think
you could use it like that as well. Actually, now that you mention it, I you know, we don't use any AI in creation, so this might seem obvious to people that do. And you could have a sound, like you could write a cool drum beat with some chords. You could then use AI to be like, come up with 5 bass line ideas for this. Yeah. You know, just like, what haven't I thought about for this chord pattern? You know, give me 5 completely different rhythmically inspired bass lines. And you could be like, wow, that one's actually really cool. I would never have thought to have just stayed on that same note the entire time in that rhythm, you know, so.
And I would recreate it then. I wouldn't leave it for, and that's a personal satisfaction thing, I think, more than anything.
The thing is, you'd probably, if it was on a fast deadline, you'd probably then be able to export the MIDI file and then you put your own sound to it.
Totally,
I don't know if you like, I don't even know if you would then say, oh, I'm going to replay this whole thing I like that exactly as is. If someone was like, do you want to download the MIDI file?
No, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean more in terms of, and there is a good argument in that, because I think that's something you go back and forth in production anyway, in general, in your mind. It's kind of like, oh, it's never perfect. At what point do you accept what's there? I always used to be really resistant of, sorry, this is a bit of music talk, but the program that we use is Logic Pro X, and within that, they have drum sounds and they have bass sounds, but they kind of come with the package. It's kind of like you could buy the base model of a car, but if you're really into your cars, you'd probably change the lining on the seats and you'd put different alloys and brakes on it, etc. So we then outsource different sounds through different companies that create different sounds and use that in the box, or we hire musicians to play the bass for us, you know, all those there's so many different ways you can approach it. But ultimately, if it sounds good, sometimes you end up going full circle and back to like exactly what you said. Actually, AI did do a really good job of that bass line, and I love how it sounds. I'm just trying to recreate it to sound that good.
Yeah.
Or to sound what to recreate what I initially liked about it.
It would never replace the human. That's the thing that's interesting in this version.
Yeah.
You know, it's always bouncing off of something the human does, and it always needed the human input to begin with. So there's just no world where I see humans being able to be taken out of it.
No, and I think you could argue this next thing I'm going to say didn't have humans into it for the specific part of the actually no, I really can't think of a circumstance where I'd be happy to remove any people and would be pleasantly surprised, entirely 100% satisfied with the result. What I was going to say was, once you've created that piece of music, I do foresee a world arriving where we can put that piece of music into it, and then it spit out all the different pieces of music you would need for all the different touch points, like your app sounds and your, there'll be people around the world that are actively working on this and
like
trying
an
to find
Opus,
a good model.
Opus clip version, really, isn't it? But just of sound. But like, trawl through this sound, find me 10 small engaging hooks, audio hooks instead of visual hooks that are no more than 2 or 3 seconds long. Here are all the constituent stem parts, etc. This is what I'm looking for.
Opus is a great piece of software if you don't use it already. If you create content in a way, shape, or form, long form, and you want short clips from it, Opus is a website where you can upload that long clip. In fact, if you're watching this as a clip on socials now, we've used Opus to get it. You upload the 30-minute file, and it will chop it up into different pieces of content with subtitles, whatever you want on it.
Opus clip.
Yeah, really, really good. And so what you're saying is a version of that could be used for music. You put in, I'm developing an app and I need 10 sounds out of this thing. Can you create it? And again, that could just be a starting point, or it could just end up being the full end thing.
Maybe that's another thing, like the last episode we recorded in terms of talking about variations and, reworking of songs and recognizable sonic branding assets to different moods. There is a world where you could have your brand track, etc., and upload it to something and be like, hey, give me 4 different versions that are like this but different, using different instruments. I still think you're then limited by the actual quality of the sounds that they're going to use, etc., and the overall finished, the pedigree that it will have, and if that's really what you want to align your brand with. But to get like an idea, say, it'd be an interesting thing for even us to consider using when somebody comes and says like, oh, hey, we want some variations for this campaign. It'd be like, hey, we're thinking maybe something around this one. Which one of these do you think is similar? Which one aligns best with what you guys have in your head that maybe we've used AI for that's, done 3 different versions of like a Christmas vibe on like a brand track or something.
Yeah. I think the hard bit is the licensing, because I know the licensing gets very complicated because who owns it? Does the company that made the AI own it?
Well,
they're able
for us,
to
we would then
it,
be reworking the ideas, wouldn't we? I would
do that to be safe.
I would
always
be
do that to
using
be
it then
safe.
as like the director that we were referencing earlier in terms of them just using it as like more of like a pitch tool, I suppose.
Yeah,
like
an advisor.
Let's get a really clear idea. And that's the thing with sound, is you can talk about sound all you like, as we're doing now. But when you actually hear a song, I could be describing a song to you for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then play you 20 seconds of it. You'd be like, that's nothing how I imagine what you were talking. So I think it's really good for doing that.
Speeding
And
up
I think
that starting process. Yeah.
And I think that could even give assurances to brands that you're working with or agencies, et cetera, of like, oh, okay, yeah, they do get it. This does sound pretty close to what we had. Now, giving them 10, 15 grand to do it, I feel way more confident in doing this now. We should pull the trigger on this.
And I think the most important
AI.
I think the most important part of that process, though, is to then remove that piece of music so they don't get demoitis by listening to the AI thing over and over and over and over and over again, convincing themselves, actually, that's the piece of music I want.
Non-downloadable link. Yeah, that's a good idea. Exactly.
Also, we've all heard a song. This isn't a really important thing to mention, I think. We've all heard a song on the radio and we're like, that is awful. What is that? You hate it. That's your initial impact. If that was a brand... Ooh, no, I'm not interested. Stop trying to sell me your whatever it is. But the more times you listen to it on the radio, after a month, you're singing along. And then you're like, oh, I do kind of like that. I'm feeling guilty, but I like it now. You've trained your brain to like it. That's how it works.
You've heard it enough times.
But how many times does that happen with a brand where actually people are just switched off, turned off initially? I think it'd be very hard to convince me of a brand that I really didn't like, just see their name enough and then suddenly I'm starting to shop there. I think there's there would have to be a bigger shift that would happen for me to be like, actually, now I'm in. But it wouldn't be that you just cram it in my face. If anything, I think it has the opposite effect. If it just kept seeing it, I'd be like, it turned me off more.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm only using it as an example of, we've all heard that song where it comes on the radio and you switch over to another channel because you hate it. And you'll do that every time for like 10 times. Imagine that being your brand. Like, you wouldn't stick to a piece of crap music just because you've heard it 20 times. So you're assuming everyone's going to stick around for 20 times.
Well, no,
to like your brand.
You don't want that connotation, do you?
Exactly. So if you hear it and you initially think this AI stuff is rubbish, which I'm sure would have happened to that other brand, and then they just listen to it so many times.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it's true. I also think you don't want to brush past you said earlier, you said, ooh, no. You said, no, I don't do that. And that is also a potentially good sonic branding campaign for the game, Uno. You had a bunch of people just go, no. And then it was like, no. So let's make sure we remember that.
I'll leave you pitching that one, outreaching to that one.
So let's ask the misconception, George, again. Do you stick with your answer?
I stick with my answer. I think it's a misconception.
Yes, I also think it's a misconception, George. I'm so glad we agree on that.
Yep. I like how we've come up with ideas and how it could be used. I think a good brainstorming session. I'm not against AI. I use AI day to day. I like it. But I think awareness is the most important thing of how much human connection you believe your brand needs. And I would say that's all the human connection you can get.
I like that.
Humans buy from humans.
There you go. Bombshell.
For now.
But it's interesting because you say humans buy from humans, but then there's loads of stuff. It's the dead earth theory, dead internet theory, I think it's called.
Right.
Yeah. And it's this thing, you just reminded me of it, that I was hearing about a few months ago. And it's basically the rise of AI generated content, which is then being commented on by AI generated bots that are all commenting on each other, and huge swathes of the internet that are basically just going to be AI generated and AI perpetuated. And I think it was called the dead internet theory. And I was like, mind blown, because it'll get to a point.
I said humans buy from humans. I didn't say robots buy from robots.
But that's the step.
But I'm not denying it.
That's the parallel. Yeah, exactly. Robots talk to robots because they get you.
Imagine the first AI company that sets itself up, creates itself a bank account, raises itself some funds from another robot, and then makes itself bankrupt because it realizes it has no customers other than other robots.
Yeah. That's mental, isn't it?
It's not a good conversation for NatWest when they need to pull in their clients to tell them they've got no funds in their bank accounts and they're actually robots.
But then it's like with the AI thing, it's just like using bots to be like, or even just bots, which I guess are a version of AI, to, click on pages to be generating ad revenue for websites that are clocking visits, but they're not visits. So they're then getting paid by the ads that they have on their website. So it's like, it's kind of something that's already sort of happening, and it's only going to get more. But that's a very different podcast and a very different conversation.
It is. And crucial question, have you got anything else you want to say for this episode?
Goodbye.
Bye.